Hi, I've been in the studio preparing samples for an online color class that I'm teaching soon. And I want to talk about a couple of aspects of color that are really important if you like to mix your own paints or even your own dyes. So in this video, I'm going to focus on the idea of color or paint, well, actually both color and paint, having qualities that are either warm or cool, and the word we often use for that is the overtone. So within the family of blue, for example, there are lots and lots of colors of blue, and some of them lean warmer, and that means they lean more toward the yellow side of the color wheel, and some of them lean cooler, and that means they lean more toward the green and purple side of the color wheel. And that can be really critical when you're mixing paints, because sometimes the fact that the paint has an overtone that's warm means it's going to get in the way of mixing the color that you have in mind to mix. And so color chips are a great example of this.
I've got some color chips here, and these would all fall into the family that we would usually describe as purple or violet. But in fact, they're not the same color at all. The samples right here lean more toward red. The sample right here leans more toward blue. So they're in the purple family, but they still lean toward colors that are on either side of them. And that's what we can think of as the overtone. Now I have a set of what I call color constant cards, and this is a set of the 12 colors that are on a traditional color wheel, and it's the purest version of the color that I could find working with a printer, so that I have what I call here my color constant. My color constant for the purple is the card I use as my standard if I'm planning to mix purple using paints. And you can see now, especially by comparison, that when I put the color constant card toward these cards, actually these aren't even in the purple family now. They're actually in the red-violet family, which is next door. These are kind of on the borderline, but they really do still lean a little bit more toward the red-violet. And these two have more blue in them than my sample, my color constant, and they really belong in the blue-violet family, which is to the right of the purple on the color wheel. So this is the card that I want to match, and what I'm going to do is to use a variety of paints here to demonstrate for you a really useful exercise that you can use yourself to mix the paints that you have on hand and understand better the qualities that those paints have. So let's open the paints and get started on that. So here's the assortment of red paint that I'm going to use. This is a red textile paint from ProChem. I really love it. If you look at it, I don't know whether you can tell on the camera, but I can tell because I've used it so often. It actually leans a little bit warm. So it has a little bit of an orange cast to it, and that can be problematic. You might not see it when you're just looking at the container, but when you start mixing it or you start comparing it to other paints, then you can see the difference. So here's a red. This is Rose Bright Red acrylic. And I don't know whether you can tell in the picture, but this is a little bit more pure in terms of being red and not having that orange cast to it. Then I have a red acrylic paint, a little bottle of paint, and it's more the pure red and doesn't have that orange overtone to it. So that's a good choice. In addition to those, I have two versions of a magenta. I have this quinacridone magenta from Liquitex, and this is a red, but it's got more of a blue cast. So it's going the other direction when we talk about overtones, as does this little container of magenta, which is also from Pro Chemical and Dye. So what I'm going to do is explore these two varieties of red mixed into a whole set of blues. The blues I'm using are a true blue from Pro Chemical and Dye. This is pretty close to the blue color constant card I have, so that's straightforward. Then I have a cobalt blue from Liquitex, and I hope you can see the difference between those two blues. They're not the same. This is closer to the color wheel. This is a pretty good substitute, but it's still a little bit different. They're not the same color. Then I have this turquoise from Liquitex, because sometimes turquoise turns out to be a good way to get at purple that's a pure bright purple if the blue that you have has a weird overtone that's interfering, and sometimes you won't know that till you mix it, so you'll see what I mean in a minute. And here's another little bottle that's also a turquoise blue. And here's a color that here's why it's so important to learn the color wheel, the official yellow, orange, red, violet, to learn the names that the families are called, because companies give their colors all kinds of proprietary names that might not mean anything to you. For example, this is a turquoise for all intents and purposes, but the name of the paint is Caribbean Breeze. And don't we all wish we were there right now on the beach with this paint doing the experiments there? Okay, so I'm going to set up my palette. I'm going to set up my palette by putting a little dab of blue. And if you're doing this at home, which I recommend, it wouldn't be a bad idea to label. You could even do it in advance. So I could write here that this is the Liquitex. I know it's upside down. I guess once those are out of the container, they're pretty close. That's the True Blue from ProChem. There's the Liquitex Turquoise Blue. This one's going to be a wild card because it's a little bit lighter and a little bit greener. So a little bit of Caribbean Breeze. And then a little squirt of the bottle paint, which is called Island Blue. There you go, we've got a theme going here. Now, first I'm going to mix these blues with the magenta. So I have a little bit of the quinacridone magenta, and then I'm going to put a little spoonful of ProChem magenta over there. And I'm going to paint onto a piece of 140-pound watercolor paper. With a relatively small brush. So first I'm going to take some of this blue and add this magenta to it. Now, one thing that is important to recognize is that never, when you're mixing paint, is it automatically 50-50. Usually you would start with the perceived lighter color, which I would consider this to be lighter relative to the magenta. So I started with that and then add the darker color into it. Now, that's a pretty good purple, but it's a little bit, it leans toward lavender. So if I get out my purple card, actually I'm just going to take this purple card off of the ring. So I'm not on a match there. Now, may I also say that these are lovely colors. It's great to mix these and know, and especially if you label them so you know how you got them. But if I really need this color exactly for something, then I don't have it here. So I'm going to get a little bit of this magenta and mix it into that Island Blue. And it's a little redder. That's because I put so much magenta in it. So I'm going to add a little bit more of the Island Blue. And another advantage of making samples like this, it's really fun, but another advantage is that you can keep messing around with the proportions in order to get it right. Now that's a little bit bluer, and it's a nice purple, but it doesn't match the card at all. So let's move on. Clean the brush really well. This time I'm going to use, let's see, I'll stick with this for a while. Use a little bit of this Island Breeze. Make sure you dry your brush off really well, because if you get water in the paint, it's going to get transparent. And let's try a little bit of this magenta with this color. Let's see, that went really red. What I love about this approach to understanding paints is that you learn so much from doing the mixing that you would never know if you were just trying to figure it out with your brain. So that's going to stay pretty red. I don't think, well, let's just see. I don't think I can add enough of that lighter blue, and I didn't start with the lighter blue either. So let's clean the brush off, and just for fun, don't you love it when the teacher breaks her own rules? Let's start with this, quite a bit of it, and add a little of this to it. And then we can compare them. See, so starting with the lighter color is definitely the way to go. That's still a nice color, and it will begin to approach purple. And that paint's a little bit thinner too, so it's not nearly as opaque as that is over there. So, not dark enough yet. Or deep enough color, should I say. I think I'm going to skip over this turquoise because it would basically do the same thing that we see here. And instead I'm going to go over to these two blues, the Liquitex Cobalt and the ProChem True Blue. And when you look at these two side by side, it's pretty much a toss-up which one would be considered lighter. So I'm just going to put some blue down and then add the magenta to it and hope for the best. And I think you can probably already see what a difference it makes using that blue instead of the turquoise. So if you were, see there, I'm getting a lot closer using this other blue. Now, the takeaway when you're working on color exercises like this and like the other ones in my course is that now you know that if what you really want is red-violet, which is this color, the way to go at it is not to start in with the red and the blue that I just used, or the magenta and the cobalt, but to shoot right over to a version of turquoise, whatever you've got, because you're going to get a lot closer to red-violet if you use that combination. Let's see, so I started with that. Now let's try the Liquitex Cobalt and add a little bit of this to it. Still a little bit too blue. And it's easy to overdo it, which is again the value of samples, so you don't actually screw up something that you're getting invested in, I guess. There, that's almost an exact match that way. So it's just sort of tweaking the amount that's in the recipe and then being sure to use your pencil to write down which paints you used for that color so you can follow those breadcrumbs back when you want to make that color again. Now, just out of curiosity, let's use the Cobalt. And instead of using the quinacridone magenta, we'll use the one from ProChem. And then we can compare these two. Still a little bit too blue. That's getting a lot closer. So, a little bit of difference in the depth of color between these two. Maybe I haven't pushed this enough. If I really wanted to, I could put just a little dab of it on the card. It's an exact match. So there you go, two ways to get it purple using two blues that are really close, pretty similar. Now I want to switch over And instead of using the magenta, I'm going to try using these other 3 reds, or maybe 2 of them since they're fairly similar, and we can compare those to the samples I have right here. Okay, now I'm going to use the blues that I had here, and I'm going to use these other reds. And I have this red from ProChem, and in this light in the studio, you can really see the difference between these 2 reds. I hope you can see that too. And then here's the thinner true red. We'll see about that. So I'm going to start again with turquoise, and I'm going to pick up this blue, and I'm going to add a little bit of this red, which is the ProChem. Now, well, I'll show you at the end, but the fact of the matter is that that is the red that has an orange cast to it. So this color is a lot muddier. It might be a great color to use. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Muddy is descriptive, it's not punitive. So, but I hope you can see how much duller that is, and you certainly will when I put the samples side by side. So now let's try, I'm not going to mess around with that I used before, but I'll use, clean the brush. I'm going to use this turquoise that I didn't use last time. It's a deeper turquoise than that real light one that I used before. And we'll try a little bit of this red with it. And what you're seeing is pretty much what's going to be true across the board using these 3 reds, all 3 of them. It makes a muddier version, or let's rephrase using the word muddy. It is a version of purple that is not as pure as what I need if I want to match this card. And that's because the orange overtone in this version of red doesn't really work with the turquoise at all. It does if that's what you want, but the turquoise is a poor choice. Just to prove the point, let's go ahead and use that turquoise again, right here. And this time, we'll try this little red that came out of the craft bottle. See what it does. It's thinner, so it's not as pigmented, so it'll take more of it. But I'm getting the same basic effect. I'm getting an interesting color. Be great to use for shadows, or if you like muted versions of colors, you might like that. But it isn't anywhere close to the purple that I have in my hand. So now let's try out the other 2 blues and see what kind of luck we have with those. I'll start with the cobalt. And I will add the ProChem. And it is still being affected by that orange cast in that paint. Cast and overtone are words you can use interchangeably. Now let's try the ProChem blue. And I will add the Liquitex to it. Overdid it with the red, so we need a little bit more blue. It's a beautiful plum. So now you know if you're looking for plum, that'd be one way to get it. It's, I don't know, over here, once I take it off of the original square and make it slightly more transparent, it's a little bit closer, but it's still not right on. Now, just so that I can answer the question that somebody's asking, which is what would happen if you mixed the blue and the turquoise together and then added the red. Let's try that on for size. So here's a little bit of Prochem blue, and I will add a little dab of the Liquitex. And then let's go with the Liquitex red. These are all looking pretty much the same. But let's paint that out over here and see how it looks when it's a little bit thinner coat. Yep, not much difference really. So let me get the first set and put them side by side here for you. So it's really pretty entertaining to pursue an exercise like this, and you can do it with any set of colors. You could do it with yellow, all the yellows that you have and all the greens you have, and see what you come up with too. Or you could try it with oranges and mix those into blue and come up with an amazing array of rust colors. In this case, they're not all dry. That one isn't dry yet at all. But out of everything I mixed, nothing over here is really coming close to this purple. They're all interesting, but they all have a sort of darkness to them that comes from the fact that the red paint had that very, you might think it was insignificant, but it wasn't. It was a significant overtone toward the warmer side of the palette that caused this to happen. And then over on this side, the ones I did first with the turquoise, I got pretty close, with the magenta. All of these are nice, but they're not really, the ones with the turquoise aren't really close. But when we look at the ones down here, they're closer. And this one, which is the cobalt with the magenta, is really close, as is this one, which is the cobalt with the Prochem magenta.
So I hope you find that intriguing in the way that I do. I'm kind of a color nerd anyhow, but it's definitely worth doing exercises like this if you want to ramp up your ability to mix paints and really get to the point where you can predict what's going to happen. And I want to close by saying that it doesn't matter what brand paints you have. It doesn't really matter. I'm not even sure it matters that much whether you're using paints. You could use Inktense blocks. The same basic theory is true with dyes when you're using fiber reactive dyes. But in general, what you really want to hone, which is why the color constant cards are so useful, you want to develop your own color constant, whatever it is, doesn't have to be my cards. And then you want to have that in your head, or you want to have a set available so that you know where you're headed, so that you can see the little differences, which otherwise you might not recognize, and that might sink the ship. So you don't have to have these paints, but if you look at a red and you start thinking, that might have an orange overtone or a warm overtone, let me test it out and see. If you look at these magentas, you know those are cool. And with the blues, you can see based on what I did, how much difference there is between what we think of as a true color wheel blue and a turquoise. So have some fun playing around with this, explore overtones, and make some samples, because it will make your work richer and it will give you understanding that you'll really appreciate having. If you enjoyed this video and watching me muck around with paints, please subscribe to my channel. And if you think these color constant cards might help you, or that you would enjoy the online color class, the details for that will be below the video. Have a great afternoon and stay safe.